In a room buzzing with restless energy, Lieutenant Ava Lin sat perfectly still. The other pilots shifted in their seats, tapped their boots, and exchanged jokes to burn off the nervous tension before their briefing. But Ava didn't move, not a twitch, and that stillness drew side eyes and whispers like static building before a storm. She didn't laugh. She didn't fidget. She didn't even blink more than necessary. That made people uncomfortable. They muttered about her behind her back. One even said she looked like a drone waiting for instructions. Someone else joked that if she ever faced real combat, she might just freeze up and let herself be shot down. Nobody said it to her face, of course. She wasn't hostile. She was just unreadable. She gave nothing away. Not excitement, not fear. Just calm. Cold, perfect calm. And that was the problem. Because in this world where adrenaline was currency and panic often danced just beneath the surface, someone who didn't show anything felt like a crack in the wall. It wasn't just that she didn't fit in. It was that she made them question their own nerves. So, they gave her the safe missions, the milk runs, the stretches of sky where nothing ever happened. Let the robot fly loops while the real pilots went west where the danger lived. She didn't argue. She didn't complain. She nodded, noted her orders, and carried them out with machine-like precision. But that morning something was different. The air felt off. Maybe it was in the way the commander's eyes lingered on her a beat too long, or how she paused before folding her flight gloves. Whatever it was, the stillness that made everyone uneasy was about to be the very thing they would cling to when everything else fell apart. Ava Lin wasn't the kind of person you noticed first in a room. Her uniform was always neatly pressed hair tucked into a regulation bun without a single strand out of place. She wore no makeup, no jewelry, and carried herself with the unshakable discipline of someone who had long since erased the need to make an impression. She had transferred into the squadron 3 months earlier. No fanfare, no mistakes, no outbursts. Just quiet, precise work. Her evaluations were impeccable. Flight simulations, tactical response drills, fuel efficiency and reaction speed. All marked her at the top of the unit. But none of it mattered the way it should have. No one really knew how to talk to her. She didn't chat about movies or sports or what snacks she missed from home. She ate her meals alone at the corner of the long metal table, eyes fixed on flight maps while others swapped stories and jokes. If someone joined her, she acknowledged them politely, then went right back to her work. She didn't push people away, not exactly. She just gave them nothing to hold on to. People began calling her names: robot, drone, ice queen. Not with cruelty, but with the uneasy tone people use for things they don't understand. To them, emotion meant humanity. And Ava's quiet efficiency looked a lot like emotional absence. When she didn't laugh at their jokes, flinch at teasing, or sigh after a long flight, they took it as coldness. The truth was, Ava had trained herself out of reflex. Years of effort had gone into removing what she called unnecessary leakage. Her face didn't twitch, her voice never wavered, and her hands moved like they were guided by software, not nerves. It wasn't that she didn't feel. It was that feeling too much had once almost cost her everything. Colonel Marshall, the squadron commander, kept her on non-critical patrols. His justification was always the same. High skill, yes, but low team integration. Not enough emotional readouts. No signs of stress meant no proof of readiness. Ava heard it all quietly every time they handed out assignments. She never argued. Some thought she didn't care. That was the biggest misconception. Ava cared deeply, but she believed care was shown through action, not expression. And to her, every perfectly calculated maneuver, every efficient fuel report, every uneventful flight was a silent statement of value. But that didn't stop the walls from closing in. At night, she reviewed her simulator results alone, wondering if excellence was enough. The dorm hallway echoed with laughter she wasn't part of. The only time she felt fully seen was when she flew. In the cockpit, there was no misunderstanding. The machine understood her language. Clean data, sharp turns, flawless execution. No judgment, just response. She didn't miss home. She didn't write letters. Her whole life, it seemed, had been quietly compressed into procedure. And yet beneath the calm exterior there was a hunger she didn't speak of. The desire not just to be accepted, but to be trusted. To be seen as capable, not in spite of her stillness, but because of it. Everyone else in the unit had stories that echoed through the halls. Ava's story lived in flight logs and black box recordings. No drama, just results. But war doesn't read resumes. And soon it wouldn't be her silence that set her apart. It would be what she did when the sky fell silent, and the only thing standing between life and death was the pilot no one understood. The squadron felt like a fraternity disguised in flight suits. Loud voices filled the hallways, echoing off metal walls as pilots tossed banter across bunks and joked about each other's flight records. There was always someone laughing, someone cursing, someone playing cards with one boot off, and music blaring low from an old speaker. Most of them were men bonded by long missions, shared boredom, and the adrenaline that came from flying too close to enemy lines. They slapped each other on the backs, teased about bad landings, and swapped war stories like badges of honor. There was an ease between them, a current of belonging that required no explanation. Ava didn't disrupt that current. She just never touched it. She showed up on time, spoke only when needed, and vanished after briefings like a shadow moving in reverse. In the cafeteria, she picked the far end of the table, not from pride, but habit. No one ever asked if they could sit beside her, and she never asked them either. She wasn't disliked, just left alone. Her presence seemed to dull the room's natural rhythm like static, cutting through a favorite song. When others cussed after drills or cracked a joke to cover nerves, she simply nodded and made notes on her tablet. The difference was small, but in a place where unity meant survival. Small differences echoed louder. Even her locker looked different. No photos, no stickers, no inside jokes scribbled with marker. Just polished boots, neatly folded gloves, and a single maintenance checklist pinned inside the door. It wasn't that she didn't belong in the air. It was that she didn't belong in the downtime. There were nights when the rec room buzzed with games and movie nights, and Ava would walk past without a glance, heading instead to the simulator. To most of the squad, the simulator was punishment. To her, it was silence she could control. They bonded in mess halls. She bonded with flight paths. It wasn't arrogance. It wasn't coldness. It was simply a rhythm no one else could hear. And while others traded stories about home, Ava sat with her back to the wall and eyes fixed on the flight screen, waiting for the one place she did belong to, call her back. The briefing room always felt colder in the morning. Pilots filtered in with half-zipped flight suits and steaming mugs settling into seats as the screens flickered on. Colonel Marshall stood at the front, arms crossed, waiting for the chatter to fade before starting the rundown. He moved through the assignments with brisk clarity. Alpha would sweep North Bravo, took the West Corridor, and Charlie was to maintain the Southern Recon arc. Then came the pause. He glanced at the tablet in his hand, then back to the room. Lieutenant Lin, you'll cover the Eastern Ridge. Standard perimeter patrol. Eyes only. There was a beat of silence then, a ripple of low murmurs. Jackson leaned forward, his voice just loud enough to carry. Milk run again. Makes sense. Don't want to stress the system. A few snickers followed, but Ava gave no sign she heard. She simply nodded once and wrote down the coordinates. Her face, as always, was unreadable. Colonel Marshall's gaze lingered on her, but he said nothing more. After the meeting, the pilots stood and stretched, falling into their usual clusters. Ava moved with quiet precision, gathering her gear without hurry. As she passed Jackson's row, he smirked but didn't speak. He didn't have to. His expression said enough. In the hallway, Marshall spoke with his second-in-command voice low. Her numbers are sharp, but she makes everyone uneasy. No emotional signature, no instinctive behavior, just silence. He tapped the tablet again, almost as if trying to make the data say more than it did. I'm not putting her in high contact zones until I know what she'll do under pressure. She might be the best on paper, but that's not the battlefield. We need pilots we can read. People, not puzzles. Back in the prep room, Ava suited up in silence. The others joked, checked their helmets, and passed around last-minute snacks. She checked every buckle twice, scanned her HUD settings with exacting care, then stood by the exit before anyone else. Ready, dismissed, invisible. And outside, the sun was already burning off the morning mist as if nothing strange had ever passed through that room. But somewhere in the corner, the question remained. What if the puzzle was the only one prepared for the game about to begin? The room buzzed with the usual pre-flight tension. Pilots leaned back in their chairs, tossed comments back and forth, and pretended not to watch the screen counting down to briefing start. Ava sat in the second row, hands folded on her tablet, eyes straight ahead like nothing in the room mattered but the blinking map. Jackson nudged his buddy with a grin. "Watch this." He leaned forward just enough to be heard. "Hey, Lin, ever sweat before a mission, or do you just charge your batteries?" The guys around him laughed. Not cruel, just careless. The kind of teasing that felt harmless until it didn't. Ava didn't turn. She didn't blink. She replied without shifting her posture. "My last deployment logged 72 hours in active combat zones. 0 mission failures. 0 casualties under my lead." The laughter trailed off, not because the numbers were wrong, but because they were too exact. Someone let out a low whistle. Jackson raised his eyebrows, then chuckled. "Cool. Still sounds like something my toaster would say." Captain Ellis, standing near the back, watched the exchange with a quiet frown. He didn't interrupt, but he didn't look away either. Colonel Marshall entered just as the room began to settle. Eyes forward, briefing started. Details rolled out fast. Flight paths, risk estimates, contingency zones. Ava took notes like always, stylus gliding over the screen with mechanical grace. She didn't miss a word. After the assignments were read, Marshall asked if there were questions. Jackson's hand shot up, half a joke in motion. "Just wondering, sir. If Lin ever hits turbulence, does she calculate, or does she finally make a sound?" The room chuckled again, but it didn't have the same bite. Ava turned slightly this time, meeting Jackson's eyes with that same unchanging stare. "Turbulence is a predictable variable. Human reaction delays increase risk. I eliminate those." Her tone wasn't proud. It was a fact delivered like a weather report. Jackson leaned back like he'd been brushed with cold air. Ellis finally stepped forward. "That's enough. Let's keep it professional." The moment passed, but not without a ripple. Ava went back to her notes. Jackson didn't speak again. And in the corner, Ellis kept his eyes on her longer than anyone else had that morning. After the room cleared, Ellis caught up to Marshall. "He's pushing her too hard. One of these days she's going to push back." Marshall shook his head. "No, she won't. That's what scares me. She doesn't push. She just watches. And one day something's going to snap. Not outside, but deep in the data, where none of us can see it." Ellis didn't argue. But as he glanced at Ava walking out calm as ever, he couldn't shake the feeling that maybe silence wasn't what made her dangerous. Maybe it was what made her ready. The cafeteria was quieter than usual. Ava sat alone at the far-end tray, balanced perfectly in front of her eyes, moving across a digital map, while she chewed in a slow, deliberate rhythm. She didn't look up when Captain Ellis approached, but she didn't ignore him either. "Mind if I sit?" She paused only for a second before answering. "I do not mind." He slid into the seat across from her, folding his arms and watching her study. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then he broke the silence gently. "It's going to be clear skies over the ridge today. That's good flying weather." She nodded without lifting her gaze. Visibility improves targeting efficiency. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. He wasn't here for weather talk. "You know why they keep giving you the east route, don't you?" Her hands stilled. Her eyes met his, focused and calm. "Because Colonel Marshall does not trust my decision-making under pressure." Ellis leaned in, slightly lowering his voice. "It's not about trust. It's about patterns. Pilots are expected to show nerves, even fake ones. When you never flinch, people start wondering if you even feel what they feel." She blinked once, slow and measured. Fear responses are inefficient. They distort perception. He nodded. "Maybe. But they're also familiar. And people trust what they recognize." She considered that for a long second. Then with the same even tone she said, "I cannot emulate what I do not experience." Ellis leaned back. He wasn't disappointed. He was intrigued. "You're not broken, Lieutenant. You're just different. The problem is most people can't handle different in close quarters." She lowered her gaze again. I am aware of the discomfort I cause." He shook his head. "That's not your problem. That's ours. But it might help if once in a while you gave them something to connect to. Even just a little." She didn't respond immediately. Then she said softly, "I was not trained for emotional mirroring. I was trained to stay functional under duress." He studied her face, searching for something, fear, sadness, resistance, but saw only clarity. "You ever wonder what people are really afraid of when they look at you?" She nodded. "That I won't break when they do." Ellis didn't say anything for a moment. Then he stood. "Well, maybe that's not the worst thing to fear." As he walked away, Ava returned to her map, but her hands moved slower. Her posture shifted slightly, not in weakness, but in thought. Something had landed. Not judgment, not criticism, just the realization that understanding might be a two-way street. And for the first time, Ava considered stepping onto it. Not for them, but for herself. There had been another squadron once. Different faces, different call signs, but the same gray skies and cold metal under her boots. Ava remembered the day it happened, not in full detail, but in flashes like snapshots half developed in the dark. The sound of alarms, the sharp snap of a radio cutting out mid-word, the moment when control lost contact and every second became its own decision. They had been on a standard recon mission just like the ones she flew now. No real danger, no signs of activity. Then the missiles came. Not from radar, not from heat. Just there, all at once. She remembered watching two jets vanish from her screen before she even processed the first explosion. The sky turned into smoke and scattered metal. The others screamed. The comms filled with panic. One voice begged for help, another cursed, another cried. Ava said nothing. Her hands moved across the controls without hesitation, left hand adjusting pitch, right hand deploying flares, eyes scanning for a path. She didn't feel calm. She didn't feel anything. She had no time to. Her squad leader froze. He had more hours, more ribbons, more years. But in that moment he was paralyzed by indecision. Ava's voice had broken through the comms once. Not loud, just direct. "You have 2 seconds to climb, or you'll take a second strike." He didn't climb. His plane vanished from her display. She didn't tell anyone how she got out. Not because it was classified, but because the details made people uncomfortable. How she used the debris field as cover, how she calculated wind direction mid-dive, how her pulse never rose past the green zone, and how, when she landed back at base helmet tucked under her arm, she didn't shed a single tear. The debrief was clinical. Her report was perfect. They called it exceptional composure under fire. They didn't call it what it really was. Trauma wearing a mask of control. Ava knew something broke that day. Or maybe something rewired. Either way, she never reacted the same again. She started retraining herself after that. Not just tactics, but biology. She practiced lowering her heart rate at will, practiced breathing in silence. She memorized the emergency protocols backward, then wrote her own contingency flowcharts when those weren't fast enough. She stopped trusting instinct. Instinct relied on fear. She relied on structure. Somewhere along the way, emotion became a luxury she couldn't afford. The rest of the world called that robotic. She called it staying alive. It wasn't pride. It was survival. She didn't laugh less because she didn't care. She laughed less because laughter didn't buy her time when things went wrong. What people didn't see was that every silence she held was a calculation. Every still moment was a reservoir of focus. When others showed fear, she saw numbers, timelines, probabilities, not because she was born different, but because she had seen what panic cost. Ava didn't talk about the crash with anyone in her new squadron. It wasn't secrecy. It was math. The risk of misunderstanding outweighed the benefit of empathy. She wasn't there to be liked. She was there to fly, to bring people back alive. Still in the rare quiet between drills, sometimes her thoughts drifted, not to the explosion or the screaming, but to the moment after, when the silence settled, when she realized no one else was coming home. That was the moment that shaped her, not the combat, the aftermath. Now, When she sat alone at breakfast, when Jackson cracked a joke, when Marshall raised an eyebrow at her numbers, it wasn't pride that kept her quiet. It was memory, not just of loss, but of function. She had survived by doing what others couldn't, and maybe that made her strange. But in her mind, it made her necessary. Not everyone is built to carry panic. Some are built to carry precision. And Ava Lin had made peace with being the one who wouldn't break, because someone had to be. The sky was calm as Ava cruised along her assigned route. The eastern ridge stretched below a spine of rock and pine that had never once triggered an alert. Her instruments read clean, no wind shear, no radio chatter, just the quiet hum of routine. 32 minutes into patrol, a flicker appeared on her thermal display. Brief, narrow, almost too sharp. She recalibrated the sensor, expecting it to fade as a glitch. Instead, it flashed again, slightly stronger. Same bearing, same pattern. Her fingers paused over the throttle. Control, this is Charlie 1. Detecting transient thermal spike at grid Echo 9. Recommendation, verify ground temperature sensor calibration. There was a pause before response. Charlie 1 acknowledged. Northern Ridge reports anomalous wind refraction in that zone. Likely false return. Copy, Ava replied, eyes still fixed on the display. But her hands moved. She marked the grid manually, plotted timing intervals. The signal returned every 41 seconds. Not random, not natural. Her HUD showed no movement. Radar was clean, but thermal was pulsing in a rhythm too precise to be geological. Cooling exhaust, masked engines. Ava had seen similar readings before in simulation and in memory. Her breathing remained steady. Her posture didn't shift, but her awareness sharpened. She didn't change altitude, didn't alter course. She knew better than to deviate without orders, but she adjusted her scan interval, set the sweep to refresh twice as often. Every movement on her console was deliberate, silent, a kind of listening. Ava checked her own equipment next, verified the integrity of her heat sensors, cross-referenced altitude pressure drift. Everything held. The data wasn't lying. It just wasn't being believed. Back at control, her report was logged as background noise. Not urgent, not actionable. Pilots joked on open comms about empty valleys and wasted fuel, but Ava stayed locked on that ridge. Her instincts didn't spike. Her pulse didn't rise, but her focus narrowed to a razor's edge. This wasn't panic. It wasn't even suspicion. It was certainty waiting for confirmation. Something was there. Something careful. Something waiting. And if she was right, she wouldn't have the luxury of doubt. Only time. And time, she knew better than anyone, always ran out fast. The signal didn't vanish. It grew. Ava's sensors began to register multiple thermal spikes flickering just beneath radar range. Same pattern. Same rhythm. Like an orchestra tuning before the first note. Then came the faint blip of encrypted communication. Short burst, precise, coordinated. Control Charlie 1. Confirming repeated thermal patterns at grid Echo 9. Intermittent encrypted signal detected. Ava's voice stayed even, but her hands were already adjusting course just slightly enough to widen the scan radius. Back at control, the response came fast. Maintain your course. Do not engage. Marshall's voice cut through the comms firm. Ava paused. She heard the words, but the math said otherwise. If she held her path, she'd lose line of sight within 3 minutes, and if they moved, she'd never see them again until it was too late. Lieutenant Lin, do not deviate. That is a direct order. Ava didn't blink. Her fingers moved faster. Tactical display up. Fuel ratios stable. Threat vectors mapped. Escape window calculated. She pressed the mic. Control. I acknowledge the order, but I cannot comply. The comms went silent. Jackson's voice came through next, confused and sharp. Wait, did she just say she's not complying? Ava didn't answer. Her jet banked hard left nose, dipping toward the ridge. Altitude dropped fast. She rolled once to align with the valley edge. What is she doing? Ellis whispered at the control panel. Marshall stood frozen. The ridge lit up with a spread of red signatures. Dozens. Hidden emplacements. Cold-fired launchers. They'd been cloaked and waiting. A full ambush. Missile lock. Warning tone. Ava's fingers danced. Flare. Bank. Dive. Her voice came through again, low and steady. Engaging evasive. Plotting strike on command node. Control request permission to engage. Negative. All units retreat. Repeat, retreat. Ava's eyes narrowed. She didn't raise her voice, did not argue. But her next words sliced through the noise. Immediate withdrawal exposes all squadron vectors. Recommends surgical disruption. She wasn't asking. She was already moving. Her jet dove into the blind spot between signal cones. Missiles launched, 2, then 4. Ava ducked under the first volley, threaded between radar shadows. She was inside their net before anyone could react. In the control center, red lights flashed. Marshall shouted for override. Ellis just watched the screen jaw tight. She's doing it. She's actually doing it. Jackson, now in full sprint over radio, barked confusion. Is she crazy? She's flying straight into it. But she wasn't flinching. She was flying like the entire battle had been scripted in her head hours ago. Calm, exact, and terrifyingly efficient. The stillness that had made her a joke was now the only steady thing in the chaos. And every single person watching knew. Nothing would ever be the same after this. Ava's jet sliced through the canyon wall like it belonged there. Rock blurred past her canopy, and the missile alert screamed again. She dropped countermeasures with microsecond precision, forcing one warhead to detonate a few meters too early. The shockwave rolled behind her close enough to shake the hull, but not close enough to rattle her focus. Her targeting HUD flared to life. She didn't flinch. She calculated. Missile 1 inbound, track angle 37 degrees, missile 249, intercept in 5 seconds. She launched a decoy drone, then rolled into a snap climb that forced both missiles to adjust path. They chased the heat signature just as she planned. Then, with perfect timing, she fired a single round from her secondary launcher, not at the enemy, but at the air between both warheads. The projectile passed cleanly through and detonated a split second later. The resulting pressure wave knocked both missiles off balance, causing them to veer just enough to collide midair. From the command center, Ellis let out a sharp breath. No one spoke. On the main screen, smoke bloomed like ink across the ridge. Marshall leaned in, his voice hushed. That wasn't possible. That maneuver, no one's fast enough to pull that off manually. Ava didn't hear any of them. She was already using the smoke cloud to drop elevation again, hugging the terrain so closely, her altimeter screamed for caution. The radar signature vanished. She had gone invisible in a war zone, not with stealth tech, with tactics. Inside her cockpit, her face didn't change, but her hands moved like they were extensions of the aircraft. She rerouted systems, locked onto new thermal spikes, and reloaded countermeasures without missing a beat. She was flying through fire, and she made it look like art. Her next move came before anyone could process the last. She banked hard left, spun a reverse roll that put her behind a ridge corner, then used that blind angle to pop 2 tactical missiles upward, not outward, up. They weren't aimed at the enemy. They were aimed at each other. For a half second it looked like an error. Then they collided in midair. The explosion formed a thick smoke curtain that drifted downward with wind current. Ava vanished into it, changed trajectory, and came out on the other side facing the enemy line from a reverse angle. She now had a clear shot at the command node. One burst of radio traffic had revealed the location. 1 second was all she needed. Her finger hovered. Then calmly, she squeezed the trigger. Missiles launched, precise, intentional, and final. In the control center, no one moved. It wasn't awe. It was disbelief. Ava Lin had done what the manual said wasn't humanly executable, and she had done it without raising her voice, without asking for permission, just pure calculated defiance and absolute control. The first missile hit the enemy command node with pinpoint accuracy. The second and third neutralized the launcher arrays before they could recalibrate. From the air, the ridge looked like it was cracking open, the enemy formation collapsing in real time. But Ava didn't slow down. She opened comms with a voice as steady as it had been before takeoff. Primary threats neutralized. Recommend engagement pattern Delta 3 from Vector 180. Awaiting confirmation. Colonel Marshall hesitated. Then, for the first time since this mission began, he said what no one expected. "Lieutenant Lin, you have tactical command. All units follow her lead." The channel went quiet for a beat. Then Jackson's voice came through, stripped of ego. "Copy that, Charlie 1. Lead the way." Ava scanned the field. Her mind worked faster than the maps could redraw. She assigned roles with precision, breaking the formation into fluid attack pairs. She called movements in half-second intervals, reading thermal fluctuations like sheet music. Her voice never wavered. "Bravo. 2. Adjust altitude. -70. Echo team flank left by 300 yards. Wait for timing window, then strike." Her instructions were fast, clean, perfect. No hesitations. No panic. Just a kind of quiet certainty that pulled the whole squadron into sync. Ellis watched from the control center, jaw tight with awe. It looked less like combat and more like choreography. Every ship in formation moved like it had been rehearsed, but it hadn't. Ava was conducting the chaos, turning panic into rhythm. The enemy line buckled under coordinated fire. Their sensors scrambled. Their countermeasures failed to lock. Ava predicted every move they'd try before they tried it. She cut their options down one by one until retreat was their only play. Jackson, now flying in perfect formation beside her, didn't question her call when she ordered a diagonal dive to pin down a final launcher crew. He just responded with a tight copy and followed. For the first time, the squadron wasn't divided. They were one unit, one tempo, one voice. The mission ended 20 minutes later. 0 Allied casualties. Minimal ammo used. Enemy forces either destroyed or in full retreat. Ava brought her jet back into formation without ceremony. Just a quiet check-in. Charlie 1 to control. Sector secure. Request permission to return. In the control room, Marshall looked at Ellis without speaking. Ellis answered for both of them. "Permission granted." "Well done, Lieutenant." Ava didn't smile. She didn't gloat. She simply acknowledged and turned her plane for home. But in the silence that followed, every pilot on the channel knew something had shifted. The pilot they once mocked had just saved them with a level of skill none of them had seen before. She had led them not with volume or charisma, but with precision and clarity. As they flew back, no one spoke for a long time. Then Jackson's voice came through, lower than usual. Charlie 1, that was something else. Ava didn't respond. She didn't need to. The message had already been delivered, and from that moment on, no one would ever see her the same again. The hangar was packed, not just with pilots from the mission, but with others who had heard what happened. Mechanics leaned against walls, junior officers crowded the back, and commanders from other units found reasons to be there. The debrief wasn't just a review. It had turned into something more. Ava stood at the front beside Colonel Marshall. Screens behind her replayed cockpit footage, thermal signatures, and synchronized maneuvers. She didn't fidget, didn't rush, but something was different now. Her voice, when she spoke, carried warmth. She walked them through the decisions, not like she was reciting data, but like she was opening a door. The initial thermal reading followed a rhythmic interval, not consistent with geology. I mapped it against vehicle cooling patterns, then tracked the delay between spikes. Her tone was steady, but no longer cold. She explained how she saw the valley like a grid of motion, how her eyes tracked heat bloom timing against expected topography. She spoke of latency, of blind zones, of impulse vectors, but every explanation landed because for the first time her words weren't just correct, they were understood. Pilots who once joked about her now leaned forward, nodding. Jackson crossed his arms and watched like a student hearing truth for the first time. Ava pointed to her screen. I didn't react faster. I saw more slower. Stress expands my perception. It gives me more time to choose. The room was silent. No one interrupted. No one whispered. Even the most decorated officers looked like they were learning something new. Ellis stood near the side, smiling just enough to show he wasn't surprised. Not anymore. Marshall cleared his throat once Ava finished. He didn't add praise. He didn't need to. The room spoke for itself. Ava Lin had gone from anomaly to standard bearer. Her stillness had become a guidepost. Later outside, a few younger pilots approached her, not to ask for autographs, just to ask how she trained, what she watched for, how she stayed calm. And Ava answered not with charts, but with patience. For the first time since arriving, she didn't walk alone back to quarters. She moved in step with others, still quiet, still composed, but no longer separate. The space around her had changed, or maybe it had just opened, and she had stepped into it, not with noise, but with clarity. 2 days later, her name appeared on the nomination list for the Distinguished Valor Medal, not as a footnote, but at the top. Alongside it, a new tactical training module was announced, built around her mission analysis. She wasn't just recognized. She was now setting the bar. The title of the course carried her call sign: Lin Protocol Advanced Precision Under Pressure. It would be mandatory for all incoming pilots by next quarter. Ava read the email in silence, then closed her screen without a word. The recognition didn't change her rhythm, but it did settle something inside her. A quiet click, like a puzzle finally fitting into place. That afternoon, Jackson found her in the simulator bay. He didn't joke. He didn't posture. He just sat down beside her, helmet in hand. When he finally spoke, his voice was calm. I used to think calm meant cold. Now I think it means something I never understood. He paused. Teach me. Ava looked at him, not guarded, not surprised, just open. Her response was simple. Calm isn't the absence of emotion. It's the presence of readiness. Jackson nodded, like he'd been waiting to hear that for years. As the sun dipped behind the base hangars, casting long shadows on the tarmac, Ava stayed seated beside him. No instructions, no lecture, just presence. Quiet, steady, exactly as she had always been. But now the silence between them wasn't distance. It was trust. And when Jackson stood to leave, she said one last thing. Still soft, still certain, still her. Stillness isn't doing nothing, it's doing everything before it begins.